The city glittered like spilled diamonds far below Eleanor Thorne's penthouse window. Up here, in the rarefied air where fortunes were made and broken over breakfast, the chaos of the streets was a distant hum. She took a slow sip of single malt, the amber liquid catching the light from the 1,000 windows of the Vance Tower, his tower. Robert Vance's monument to greed and ego. Soon, very soon, it would be hers. Not because she craved the steel and glass, but because tearing it down brick by metaphorical brick would be the final, exquisite note in her symphony of revenge. 10 years. 10 long, grinding years since Robert Vance had destroyed Evelyn Reed. He hadn't just fired her. He'd meticulously dismantled her life, her reputation, her future, turning her into a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Don't be like Evelyn Reed. Don't stand up. Don't speak out. He'd framed her for the very financial crimes she had uncovered, crimes he orchestrated to line his pockets and those of his cronies. He'd made sure she was unemployable, unbankable, untouchable. He'd watched, with that smug, reptilian smile, as her world collapsed. Eleanor Thorne swirled the whiskey. Evelyn Reed was buried deep, a ghost only she remembered. Eleanor was a different creature entirely. Forged in the fire of betrayal, hardened by years of calculated silence and relentless study. She hadn't crawled back from the brink. She'd built a fortress on it, brick by invisible brick, dollar by untraceable dollar. Her wealth, accumulated through razor-sharp investments guided by the intimate knowledge of Vance Industries' hidden rot, was her weapon. Her patience a scalpel. Her intelligence, the blueprint for his ruin. The memory, sharp as broken glass, cut through the present. The air in Robert Vance's corner office was thick with the scent of expensive leather and deceit. Evelyn Reed, Senior Vice President of Finance, stood rigid before his vast desk, clutching a damning folder. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She'd spent months tracing the discrepancies, millions funneled through shell companies, phantom suppliers, inflated invoices. All roads led back to Vance and his inner circle, the smarmy COO, David Finch, and the venomous head of legal, Helen Sharp. Robert, Evelyn's voice was steady, belying the tremor in her hands. This can't continue. The quarterly reports are fiction. The offshore accounts, the embezzlement, it's systematic. It's fraud on a massive scale. The board needs to know. The authorities need to know. Vance didn't look up from the contract he was pretending to read. He was a large man, radiating an aura of entitled power, his silver hair immaculate. When he finally lifted his head, his pale blue eyes held no surprise, only a chilling amusement. Evelyn, Evelyn, he sighed, leaning back, steepling his fingers. Ambitious as always. Seeing dragons where there are only dust bunnies. Dust bunnies don't siphon $50 million, Robert. Evelyn slammed the folder onto his desk. Photocopies of wire transfers, doctored invoices, shell company registrations spilled out. It's all here. Every fraudulent transaction. Every lie. The door opened silently. Finch and Sharp slipped in, closing it behind them. Finch, slick and perpetually smirking, adjusted his cufflinks. Sharp, lean and predatory, fixed Evelyn with a gaze that could freeze mercury. The air turned poisonous. Vance chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Ah, David, Helen. Evelyn here seems to have stumbled upon some creative accounting. He picked up one of the invoices, feigning boredom. Tell me, Evelyn, where did you acquire these fascinating, albeit entirely fabricated, documents? Fabricated. Evelyn's blood ran cold. I pulled them from our own systems. I followed the audit trail. Did you? Sharp's voice was a silk-wrapped razor. Or did you, perhaps, feeling overlooked for that promotion, feeling resentful, decide to manufacture evidence? To damage the company? To damage Robert? The trap snapped shut. Evelyn saw it then, the cold calculation in their eyes. They weren't surprised because they'd expected her to find it. They'd wanted her to find it. They needed a scapegoat. You set me up, she whispered, the enormity of it crashing down. You knew I was auditing the Eastern Europe accounts. You planted this evidence for me to find. And now you'll pin it all on me. Vance stood, a predator rising. Such a vivid imagination, Evelyn. Sadly misplaced. Security found anomalies on your terminal. Unauthorized access to confidential files. Files that seem to be the source of these forgeries. He gestured dismissively at the damning papers on his desk. It appears your ambition has driven you to desperate, criminal acts. Finch shook his head with mock sorrow. We trusted you, Evelyn. Robert gave you every opportunity. Sharp placed a single sheet of paper before Evelyn. Your resignation. Effective immediately. Sign it, walk away quietly, and perhaps we can avoid the unpleasantness of criminal charges. For now. The threat hung heavy in the air. Panic warred with fury. Resigning was admitting guilt. But fighting them here now alone? They controlled security, HR, legal, the board. They owned the narrative. Refusing meant immediate arrest, a public spectacle, a guaranteed conviction engineered by Sharp's legal team. Her career, her reputation, ashes either way. But resignation offered a sliver of escape, however tainted. Hands shaking, vision blurred with furious tears, Evelyn scrawled her name on the line. It felt like signing her own death warrant. Vance plucked the paper away, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. Wise choice, he purred. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out. And Evelyn. He paused as she turned, broken, towards the door. Don't bother applying for references. I doubt anyone will be calling. The walk through the bustling executive floor was a gauntlet. Whispers followed her like a toxic cloud. Curious, pitying, scornful stares burned into her back. Finch watched from his office doorway, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Sharp stood near the elevator bank, radiating icy satisfaction. Security guards flanked her silently as she emptied her desk into a cardboard box, framed photos of her late parents, a stress ball, years of work reduced to pathetic scraps. The humiliation was absolute, a public flaying. Outside Vance Tower, the bustling city felt alien. The cardboard box felt leaden in her arms. She hailed a cab, the driver eyeing her tear-streaked face with indifference. As the cab pulled away, she looked back at the soaring edifice of glass and steel. It wasn't just a building, it was the tomb of Evelyn Reed. The tomb, however, proved premature. The humiliation was just the beginning. Vance, Finch, and Sharp ensured her professional death was absolute. Within days, carefully placed rumors painted her as unstable, incompetent, and finally, a thief. Industry blacklists circulated. Her phone stopped ringing. Interviews evaporated before they began. Banks, citing risk assessment, froze her accounts and called in her modest loans. Her savings bled away paying rent on an apartment she could no longer afford. Friends, fearing association with the toxic Vance Industries embezzler, drifted away. The media, fed anonymous tips from Sharp's office, ran vague but damning pieces about financial misconduct at a major corporation, always implying the culprit was a disgruntled, fired executive. Evelyn Reed became synonymous with failure and deceit. Months bled into a year. Hope curdled into a hard, cold knot of despair. She lived in a tiny, damp studio apartment, surviving on freelance data entry jobs found on shady online platforms, paid pennies, constantly terrified Vance's reach would find her even there. The once sharp, confident executive was a ghost, haunted by the echoing laughter in Vance's office, the predatory gleam in Sharp's eyes, Finch's mocking smirk. The injustice was a physical ache, a constant companion. Revenge wasn't a luxury, it was oxygen. But how? She was penniless, powerless, branded a pariah. The spark came unexpectedly. Sitting in a grimy public library, using their computers for job hunting, a futile exercise, she stumbled upon a financial news article. Vance Industries was acquiring a small, struggling tech firm specializing in data security, Aquilix. The price seemed inflated. Way inflated. A cold, analytical part of her brain, the part Vance hadn't managed to kill, flickered to life. Why? She dug deeper, using skills honed over years in high finance, accessing public filings, obscure industry forums. She found connections. The founder of Aquilix was Finch's brother-in-law. The shell company used as an intermediary in the purchase, its registered address matched a building Vance secretly owned through another layer of offshore entities. It was a classic kickback scheme, hidden in plain sight within a legitimate acquisition. They hadn't stopped. They were still stealing, still manipulating, still untouchable. And they were sloppy. Arrogantly sloppy. Because who was left to challenge them? Evelyn Reed was gone, erased. They ruled their empire unchallenged. That arrogance, Evelyn realized, clutching the edge of the library table, knuckles white, was their fatal flaw. Her despair hardened into something else. Glacial fury. They thought they'd won. They thought she was broken. They thought no one was watching. They were wrong. Evelyn Reed was dead. Long live the ghost in the machine. She wouldn't fight them from the outside. She would learn their game, master it, become invisible, and then she would destroy them from within their own world, using their own weapons, money, information, and ruthless ambition. The ghost became Eleanor Thorne. The transformation was total. Evelyn sold the last remnants of her old life, her mother's jewelry, her father's watch, for seed money. She moved continents, disappearing into the anonymous sprawl of a European capital. She devoured everything: international finance law, forensic accounting, cybersecurity, market manipulation techniques, the intricate dance of high-stakes investing. She learned to move money like smoke, through cryptocurrencies, obscure commodity trades, complex derivatives, a labyrinthine network of shell corporations registered in jurisdictions with opaque laws. She became fluent in the language of power and obscurity. And she watched Vance Industries. Obsessively. Every SEC filing, every press release, every analyst report, every whispered rumor on financial networks. She tracked their stock price like a hawk. She mapped their vulnerabilities, the overleveraged acquisitions like Aquilix, the underfunded pension liabilities quietly shifted off the books, the environmental violations hushed up by Sharp's team, the patents based on stolen research Finch had overseen. She knew their secrets better than they did. She saw the rot beneath the gleaming facade. Her initial seed money, gambled with nerves of steel on volatile markets based on her intimate knowledge of Vance's likely moves, grew. Slowly at first, then exponentially. She exploited their hidden weaknesses. When Vance Industries quietly dumped toxic waste, betting on lax foreign enforcement, Eleanor anonymously funded the local environmental group that exposed it, causing a stock dip she then profited from by shorting. When Finch orchestrated another sweetheart deal for a relative, Eleanor bought puts on the overvalued target company just before the acquisition was announced, knowing the inflated price would eventually drag Vance stock down. When Sharp bullied a small competitor into submission using frivolous lawsuits, Eleanor provided the competitor with the financial backing and legal firepower to fight back, tying Vance Industries up in costly, reputation-damaging litigation. She was a phantom in the market, a whisper of resistance. Her wealth grew in the shadows, fueled by the very corruption she sought to destroy. She wasn't just saving money, she was building an arsenal. Every dollar was a bullet. Every piece of leverage was a detonator. She cultivated allies, not friends, but assets. A disillusioned former Vance IT security expert, fired by Finch for asking too many questions about data breaches. A brilliant, ethically flexible hacker operating in the digital underworld. A retired investigative journalist with a grudge against Vance for burying a story years ago. Eleanor, as Thorne, provided resources, direction, and absolute anonymity. They provided access, skills, and dirt. The Vance trio, Vance, Finch, Sharp, remained blissfully unaware. To them, Eleanor Thorne was just another enigmatic, phenomenally wealthy investor, occasionally appearing on the periphery of their world, her modest investments in Vance stock easily dismissed as passive confidence. The years passed. Eleanor Thorne became a name whispered with respect in certain financial circles. Reserved, brilliant, unfathomably rich. She attended select charity galas, a striking figure in understated elegance, always observing, never revealing. She saw Vance, Finch, and Sharp across crowded rooms. Vance, older, heavier, radiating complacent power. Finch, slicker, more obviously calculating. sharp and cold as ever. They never glanced her way. Why would they? Evelyn Reed was a forgotten smear on their polished shoes. But Eleanor remembered. Every slight, every lie, every moment of soul-crushing humiliation fueled her glacial patience. The time wasn't yet ripe. Vance Industries, while corrupt, was still strong, buoyed by market confidence and Sharp's ability to bury scandals. Eleanor needed a catalyst, a moment of significant vulnerability. She needed them to stumble hard. The catalyst arrived disguised as ambition. Robert Vance, nearing 70, wanted a legacy beyond mere wealth. He wanted Vance Tower 2, a new, even taller, more audacious skyscraper, a monument to his ego. It was a wildly speculative project, massively over budget from the start, requiring enormous debt financing. Sharp structured the deals, hiding the true risk through complex financial instruments. Finch greenlit shoddy contractors, taking kickbacks, ensuring corners were cut. The market initially cheered Vance's audacity. The stock soared. Eleanor saw the cracks immediately. The financing was a house of cards. The construction was plagued with problems, delays, safety violations, substandard materials. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And she would be there when it fell. She began her final maneuvers, moving with the precision of a grandmaster. Through her intricate network of shell companies, Horizon Holdings, Perseus Investments, Nix Capital, she started acquiring Vance Industries stock. Not in large, noticeable chunks, but steadily, relentlessly, through hundreds of tiny, untraceable transactions across global exchanges. She used dark pools, algorithmic trading, nominee accounts. She was a persistent, invisible tide rising against the Vance shore. Simultaneously, her team worked tirelessly. The hacker delved deeper, finding the smoking guns, emails between Vance and Finch explicitly discussing kickbacks on the Tower 2 project, Sharp's instructions to shred documents related to the toxic waste dumping, internal reports doctored to hide the building's structural flaws. The disgruntled IT expert provided backdoor access to archive servers, uncovering the original fraud Evelyn had discovered a decade ago, the evidence Vance had framed her for. The journalist began quietly verifying everything, building an airtight narrative. Eleanor also orchestrated financial pressure. She shorted the bonds financing Tower 2. She placed massive, anonymous bets against Vance stock using derivatives, betting on a catastrophic fall. She leaked carefully curated, non-attributable tidbits to skeptical financial analysts, whispers about construction delays, budget overruns, regulatory concerns. Doubt began to seep into the market. Vance's stock, once soaring, started to wobble. Robert Vance dismissed it as market jitters. David Finch assured investors the project was on track and under budget. Helen Sharp threatened lawsuits against anyone spreading malicious falsehoods. Their arrogance blinded them. They didn't see the news tightening. The trigger event was both tragic and inevitable. A section of scaffolding on the half-built Vance Tower 2 collapsed during a storm. Due to Finch's cost-cutting and the use of substandard materials, it failed catastrophically. Several construction workers were killed, dozens injured. It was front-page news, a horrifying spectacle captured on countless phones. The narrative shifted instantly from ambitious project to lethal negligence. Vance Industries stock plummeted. Panic selling ensued. Regulatory investigations were launched immediately. Lawsuits rained down. The house of cards Vance built on greed and lies began to implode. This was Eleanor's moment. The moment Evelyn Reed had waited a decade for. While Vance, Finch, and Sharp scrambled, issuing hollow statements of condolence while their lawyers circled the wagons, Eleanor Thorne made her decisive move. Her vast network of shell companies emerged from the shadows. Horizon Holdings, Perseus Investments, Nix Capital, and a dozen others filed simultaneous notifications with the SEC. They disclosed their combined holdings, 34% of Vance Industries stock. Eleanor Thorne, acting as the controlling person behind this consortium, demanded an emergency shareholder meeting. Her objective, a complete overhaul of the board of directors and the appointment of herself as interim CEO to stabilize the company. The announcement hit the financial world like a thunderclap. Who is Eleanor Thorne? How had she amassed such a huge stake unnoticed? The remaining Vance stock, already battered, went into freefall. Vance was apoplectic. Finch was frantically trying to find leverage. Sharp was desperately trying to block the meeting, citing procedural issues, but her legal maneuvers were swatted aside by the sheer weight of Thorne's ownership stake and the unfolding crisis. The meeting was scheduled for 1 week later. The week was pandemonium. Vance rallied his remaining loyalists, mostly old guard board members indebted to him. He tried smear campaigns against the mysterious Thorne, implying she was a corporate raider, a vulture. But the media, smelling blood in the water after the scaffolding disaster, was focused on Vance's failures, not Thorne's origins. Eleanor remained silent, invisible. Her allies worked overtime. The journalist released the first explosive piece, a meticulously documented account of the kickback scheme involving Aquilix and Finch's brother-in-law, complete with financial trails and internal emails obtained by anonymous sources. Finch was publicly crucified. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel, Vance Tower's own auditorium, was deemed inappropriate, was electric with tension and hostility. Shareholders, many nursing massive losses, were angry and scared. Vance loyalists glared daggers at anyone who looked uncertain. Security was tight. Robert Vance, flanked by a pale and shaken Finch and a stone-faced Sharp, took the stage. He looked older, the strain evident. He launched into a defiant speech, blaming unforeseen circumstances, rogue contractors, and market manipulation for the crisis. He promised a full investigation, restructuring, and a renewed focus on core values. His words rang hollow, desperate. Then a side door opened. Eleanor Thorne walked in. Silence fell, thick and sudden. All eyes turned. She was elegance personified, a tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, her dark hair swept back. She moved with a calm, lethal grace that commanded the room. She didn't look at Vance. She walked purposefully towards the stage. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Who is that? Is that her? Thorne? She ascended the steps, ignoring the stunned expressions of Vance, Finch, and Sharp. She approached the central microphone. Vance recovered first, stepping forward, his face purple with rage. This is highly irregular. Security. Security guards hesitated, looking confused. Eleanor simply raised a hand, a gesture of imperious calm. Mr. Vance, her voice, amplified, was cool, clear, and resonated with absolute authority. I believe the shareholders are entitled to hear from the company's largest owner. She turned to face the audience, her gaze sweeping over them. My name is Eleanor Thorne, and I am here because Robert Vance, David Finch, and Helen Sharp have systematically looted this company, endangered lives, and destroyed careers for over a decade. They are not fit to lead. The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, demands for explanation. Vance bellowed into his microphone, trying to regain control, calling her accusations outrageous lies. Sharp leaned into her mic, her voice icy. Miss Thorne, these are serious, defamatory allegations. You will provide evidence immediately or face the full consequences of the law. Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator finally cornering its prey. Evidence, Miss Sharp? Gladly. She nodded towards the back of the room. The large screens flanking the stage, moments ago displaying the Vance Industries logo, flickered to life. The first image, the damning email chain between Vance and Finch discussing the Aquilix kickback scheme. Gasps filled the room. Finch visibly recoiled. Next, internal reports detailing the toxic waste dumping, with Sharp's handwritten note, handled discreetly. No paper trail. Followed by photos of the polluted site and sickened locals. Then, the doctored financial reports from 10 years ago, the original fraud Evelyn had uncovered, side by side with the real data. And then, the clincher, an internal memo from Vance, written shortly after Evelyn's firing, outlining the plan to ensure Reed is permanently unemployable and control the narrative to prevent any scrutiny of the Eastern Europe accounts. The room was in uproar. Shareholders were on their feet, yelling. Vance was shouting, trying to deny, but his voice was drowned out. Finch looked like he might vomit. Sharp stood rigid, her face a mask of fury, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. She knew the game was up. Eleanor let the evidence sink in, the noise washing over her. She waited for a lull. When she spoke again, her voice cut through the chaos. 10 years ago, Robert Vance framed an innocent woman, Evelyn Reed, for the crimes you see documented here. He destroyed her life to cover up his theft, aided by David Finch and Helen Sharp. She paused, letting the name hang in the air. Many older shareholders remembered the scandal. They silenced her. They thought they were safe. They continued their corruption, growing bolder, greedier, until their negligence killed innocent people. She turned slowly, deliberately, to face Vance, Finch, and Sharp. The hatred in their eyes was palpable. Vance looked like he wanted to lunge at her. Security guards moved closer, unsure. They thought Evelyn Reed was gone, Eleanor continued, her voice dropping slightly, yet amplified to fill every corner of the silent room. They thought no one was watching. They were wrong. She held Vance's gaze, letting the moment stretch. I have watched. For 10 years, I have watched. I learned your games. I mastered them. I used the knowledge you gave me when you framed me, the knowledge of your greed and your methods, to build the resources necessary to bring you down. The revelation hit like a physical blow. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Eyes widened in shock and dawning understanding. Whispers exploded. Reed. Evelyn Reed. She's alive. She's Thorne. Vance's face drained of all color. He staggered back a step, his hand gripping the podium for support. Finch's mouth hung open in pure terror. Sharp's icy composure finally shattered. Her eyes widened in horrified recognition as she truly saw Eleanor Thorne for the first time, saw the ghost of the woman she'd helped destroy staring back with pitiless triumph. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice ringing with cold, final victory. Evelyn Reed sends her regards. The simplicity of the statement, after the torrent of evidence, was devastating. Chaos erupted again, but it was a different chaos. Angry shareholders surged towards the stage, demanding answers, demanding resignations, demanding justice. Cameras flashed relentlessly. Vance tried to shout, but his voice was lost, his authority utterly broken. Finch cowered. Sharp frantically tried to gather papers, a useless gesture. Eleanor Thorne, Evelyn Reed reborn, stood immovable amidst the storm she had created. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply watched the empire of lies crumble around the 3 people who had shattered her world. Security, now acting under the direction of the newly empowered Thorne Consortium, moved to escort Vance, Finch, and Sharp from the stage. Vance resisted weakly, a broken man shouting incoherent denials. Finch stumbled, looking dazed. Sharp walked with stiff, unnatural dignity, her eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding the accusing stares, the flashing cameras capturing her downfall. The meeting didn't end. It descended into a frenzy of procedural motions shouted over the din. But the outcome was inevitable. With Thorne controlling over 1/3 of the stock and the remaining shareholders furious and desperate for stability, the vote to remove the existing board and appoint Eleanor Thorne as interim CEO was a landslide. It wasn't even close. As the formalities concluded, Eleanor stepped back to the microphone one last time. The room, exhausted by the emotional tsunami, fell relatively quiet. This company, she stated, her voice calm, authoritative, devoid of the icy fury but radiating absolute control, is wounded. It has been poisoned by greed and corruption for far too long. My first act as interim CEO is to authorize a full, independent forensic audit of all operations, past and present. We will cooperate fully with all regulatory and criminal investigations stemming from the evidence presented today. Those responsible for illegal acts will face justice. Those responsible for the negligence that led to the tragic loss of life will be held accountable. Vance Industries will be cleansed. It will be rebuilt on principles of integrity, transparency, and genuine value. Not as a monument to ego, but as an engine of responsible enterprise. The healing begins now. Thank you. She stepped away from the podium, ignoring the renewed clamor of questions from reporters. She walked off the stage, not through the side door, but down the main aisle, flanked by her newly appointed security detail. Shareholders parted before her, some looking odd, some still angry, many simply stunned. She met no one's eye. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of cool confidence. Outside the ballroom, in the hushed luxury of the hotel corridor, her chief of security, the former Vance IT expert, now fiercely loyal, fell into step beside her. "Ma'am, the authorities are downstairs. Vance, Finch, and Sharp are being taken in for questioning. The SEC has already frozen their personal assets." The media. "Let them wait," Eleanor said, her pace not slowing. "Issue a brief written statement confirming my appointment and our commitment to full cooperation with all investigations. Schedule a press conference for next week. I want the forensic auditors in place by tomorrow morning." "Yes, ma'am." He paused. "And, personally, it's done." Eleanor stopped walking. For a moment, the mask slipped. A decade of pain, rage, and relentless focus surfaced in her eyes, a deep, fathomless well of vindication mixed with an unexpected, profound weariness. The faces of the dead construction workers flashed in her mind. Justice for them was only beginning. Her revenge was complete, but the cost felt heavier than she'd anticipated. "Yes," she said softly, the word hanging in the quiet corridor. "It's done." She took a deep breath, the scent of hotel flowers and polished wood replacing the remembered stench of betrayal and despair. She straightened her shoulders, the mask of Eleanor Thorne settling back into place, cool and impenetrable. "Now we rebuild." She walked towards the elevators, leaving the echoes of the shattered Vance empire behind her. The ghost was gone. Only the architect of its ruin remained. The path ahead was long, fraught with the challenge of resurrecting a corrupted giant. But for the first time in 10 years, Evelyn Reed, now truly Eleanor Thorne, walked forward not fueled by vengeance, but by the hard-won right to shape a future she controlled. The view from the top would be different this time. Clearer. And entirely her own.